Thank you, Mr. Cross. For my guest on this week's intermission period, the Philharmonic concert this week marks a return to the New York scene after an absence of some years. Artist Fuleihan had his first symphony premiered by the New York Philharmonic in 1936, and John Barbaroli was the conductor on that occasion. Today we find him conducting his own second symphony, which has just received its world premiere. Mr. Fuleihan, what have you been doing these past 31 years?
Good Lord, is it 31 years? Let's see.
36 was 31 years ago, by
36
golly.
was 31 years ago. Well, I hung around New York until 1947. In the interval, I produced some other works, which the Philharmonic also premiered.
My question really is facetious because, of course, you've been a very busy man in these 30-odd years.
Well, we're all busy, you know. I mean, we have to be. It's a rat race. If you don't keep busy, you simply fall behind. Well, I hung around here, and I played. I gave recitals and composed and taught and so on. And then I went to an American university, Indiana University, as a matter of fact, I stayed there for 4 or 5 years as professor of piano and composition. And then I went out on a mission, on a Fulbright research mission for a year, and then after that I got back here and I was invited by the Lebanese government to go and
head up a conservatory there,
yes,
I think.
so their way they wanted the conservatory organized. It wasn't, it was sort of stumbling along a little bit. The old and very capable founder and director had gotten quite old, and in fact he was ill. So they had ambitions. They wanted to revamp it and bring it up to the level of the better European conservatory. So I went there supposedly for a few months to advise them and help them, and I stayed there for 8 years.
The man who came to dinner.
Yes, well, it was rather pleasant living. And
yes.
Of course, it was a nice atmosphere. And
what caliber of music student did you have there?
Rather not bad. We had the usual run of elementary students, naturally, because it wasn't a conservatory devoted simply to developing professional students. Actually, it was divided into 2 sections. One was a conservatory for professional students, and the other was just for general musical education. The level of talent is quite good. Of course, there's a question of percentages. It's a small country, and if you take the percentage of a place which barely numbers, of a city which barely numbers, say, a little over 500,000, percentage-wise, the people who are interested in taking up a musical career, is about similar to that in a larger place. Of course, in a larger place, you've got that much more population to draw on.
Mm-hmm, of course. What level of musical sophistication exists there? They have a rich folk heritage, don't they?
Yes, a rich folk heritage, but the level of musical sophistication as far as Western music is concerned is quite high. Oh, yes.
They have had Western groups appear there frequently?
Yes, we organized an orchestra there, and we gave concerts regularly every 2 weeks. And sure, packed houses. And,
yes.
No, it's a Western place. I mean, it happens to be situated geographically in the Middle East, but actually its viewpoint is Western, just as its people are, really.
That's interesting. Of course, we who have not been there tend to think of that entire part of the world as very remote.
No, it's not true. You see, there has been a tendency to lump those people in with the surrounding area, but that's simply geographic, because in the outlook, the point of view, the habits, the mode of living, and all that has been Western for many, many years, for great many years.
Yes.
They have a lot of educational facilities. In fact, Beirut could be called an educational center. They've got this, not one, but 2 or 3 universities, and it's quite a place.
Right offhand, I can think of only one concert artist who comes from a Lebanese background. That's Rosalind Elias.
Yes, that's right. Both her parents were born there. Well, there's another one now there. Another soprano who's just gone in this year, Margaret Khalil. She was born in Texas, I think.
Mm-hmm.
But
both Lebanese parents.
Lebanese. In fact, there are many of them, but because their names are anglicized often, you can't tell
We've been talking, Mr. Fuleihan, about Lebanon, and that episode in your life was, after all, some years ago. Much more recently than that, you've been in Tunis. Doing what?
Well, I went to Tunis, that's right. I always seem to go to those comparatively out-of-the-way places. I was sent by the State Department, actually, for 4 or 5 months, 5 months, yes, and I found myself staying for 4 years.
That seems to be a habit of yours.
Well, you get
a short
caught up.
assignment, and then you
Well,
stay
what
there.
happened is this, that the French had pulled out their orchestra following the total independence of Tunisia rather, and the orchestra which they had maintained there for many, many years, and there was a resulting musical vacuum which had to be filled up. So when I went there, ostensibly for some other purpose having to do with cultural affairs, when we saw that there was practically no musical activity left in the place, it was, and having had a symphony orchestra before then in existence, it might be a good idea to start reforming one. So we called upon a number of European countries for players. In fact, we picked out players for many, many countries, and we established an international orchestra. It was sort of a Tower of Babel in a way, but they were all very good musicians, and for 2 solid seasons we had concerts every 2 weeks, which were always well attended to capacity, I might say, in the biggest theater in town, and it was very successful because not only the cosmopolitan population attended in large numbers, but also a large percentage of students came, which when we were aiming to reach students. It was, well, you may say, it was an experiment in international music making, and it wasn't really a Tunisian orchestra. It was a European orchestra, inter-European orchestra, based in Tunis. Of course, there were also a few local French and Italian residents, good musicians, who remained in the orchestra.
And were you the conductor of the orchestra?
I was the animal trainer and conductor, if you want to put it that way.
Yes. Did you conduct all the concerts during the period of your stay there?
Yes, without assistance.
My, oh my.
Well, it's not so bad.
What kind of repertory?
Oh, usual repertory.
Standard
plus contemporary plus whatever we could get our hands on.
Is the orchestra still functioning today?
The orchestra, unfortunately, had to be disbanded for the very common cause of lack of funds. That seems to be a common malady everywhere.
Mr. Fuleihan, unexpectedly, you were called upon to conduct this premiere of your second symphony at this week's Philharmonic concert. How do you feel about composers conducting their works in general, and then specifically, how do you feel about conducting your own?
I was unfortunately called to do this. I say unfortunately because I very much regret the illness in Mr. Steinberg's family, which occasioned his absence. How do I feel about conductors conducting their own works? Well, I personally much prefer to conduct other works than my own. Certainly I know what is in my works, and perhaps I'm able to give a definitive version. But just as a pianist, I rarely play my own compositions. I leave that to other people, I hope. So it is in conducting. I happen to lean rather strongly towards what we know as a standard repertory. I mean, the romantic and classical and pre-classical periods. But if I have to conduct my own work, why then...
You don't mind?
Well, I mean, I just have to do it. I have to do it.
Of course. You're continuing actively as a composer, aren't you? You're working all the time?
Yes, after all, it's a job. One is conditioned to doing it, and one keeps doing it. Goodness knows why, but that's the nature of the beast, I suppose.
Of course. Mr. Fuleihan, thank you so much for visiting with us during this period. It's been a pleasure seeing you and hearing your music.
Thank you.
And now, once again, I return you to Milton CROSS.
We are back in Philharmonic Hall, where shortly we will bring you the second work on this week's New York Philharmonic broadcast. It is to be the World Broadcast Premiere of the Symphony No. 2 by the Cypriot-born composer Anis Fuleihan, who will also conduct the work. This symphony was written in October of 1962, while the composer was in Tunisia on a musical project sponsored by the United States Department of State. 26 years had passed since the premiere of Mr. Fuleihan's first symphony by the New York Philharmonic under the direction of John Barbaroli, And the composer says that during his spare time on the Tunisia project, he simply decided to write another symphony. The work is in 5 movements. The first movement is marked moderato. Next comes a vivace, to be followed by a songful slow movement marked andante con moto. The 4th movement is march-like in character, and the finale is an allegro based on an old Greek song